Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Peterson. I'm the host of the weekly podcast, WDcast, which is called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, also known as Thinkers That Do, which means that WD Partners has services that range from strategy, design, digital, and operations to architecture and construction management at WDPartners.com. Just a second about the show. The discussions we have on WDcast revolve around relevant business topics. We're not so concerned about the type of business, as you'll see today, but the topics themselves have to be about the burning platforms of the 21st century and the plethora of challenges involved. And as most of you know, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to that. So today, we're going to talk about the ins and outs of strategy in the 21st century. I'm getting a smile, so I must be right, which is daunting really to even think about. And I certainly can't talk about that topic myself for half an hour, so I have with me someone who has spent years involved in all matters strategic with some truly powerhouse companies, a very impressive resume, Sara Saldoff. Sara is the Senior Director of Digital Marketing and Customer Experience for OhioHealth. Sara, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks for coming. Great topic, great background, and also super interesting company considering everything that's going on today and what everybody's talking about. A quick disclaimer, the thoughts and opinions expressed today belong to the members of this discussion, Sara and I, for the most part, and do not necessarily represent those of the companies that we work for.
True.
Okay.
Very true.
So you can let it rip.
That's right.
Okay, Sara, as I alluded to, you have a tremendous background that you could probably write a book on, I'm thinking, just with the list of great companies you've worked for. But could you indulge us a little bit and tell us a little bit about the road that you've chosen and how you got here?
Sure, absolutely. So I started my career many years ago. It's always been in marketing. And my first job actually was with an architecture, design, and planning firm, one of the largest in the world, Gensler.
Yeah.
So great experience.
In San Francisco? Or?
I actually worked in the D.C. office.
Oh.
Yeah, it was great. And then I went to grad school back here at Ohio State afterwards, after I had spent about 3 years there. And then I've worked for a lot of companies who have either retailers or retail, next adjacent, if you will, right? Like servicing retailers. I've also been an entrepreneur. I've owned my own retail store. I've also worked for Resource Emirati, now IBM iX, for about a decade, and really honed a lot of my marketing and digital skills there. And then the opportunity came to work at OhioHealth. And the world kind of aligns all when it's supposed to, I think. And I had been starting to look, and I had a friend send me the job application for OhioHealth, or the job description. And I read it, and I was like, yeah, I could do that. I was like, but man, I'm like, I know I want to help people, but like, I kind of think that healthcare is where digital careers go to die. And my friends are like, well, just talk to the guy who's leading the team. You might feel differently afterwards. And I should say, at the end of my job description, it said healthcare not preferred. So I met my who was to be my new boss out for a drink, and I had told my husband, I was like, hey, I'm going to go grab a drink with this guy, learn about OhioHealth, but I can't imagine it's really going to go anywhere. Yeah. And so 30 minutes.
10-minute conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, yeah, it's going to be 30 minutes. I'll pick up dinner on the way home. It'll be great. So I walked out of the bar 90 minutes later, and I called my husband, and I was like, I think I want to work in healthcare, and I think I want to work for this guy. And he's like, really? Like, what did you drink? And I said, no, I just had water. I'd had a cold, and I was like, I'll just, take it easy. And what he had portrayed to me was this notion that, like, healthcare's on this precipice, right? all these other industries have changed and put the customer at the center of everything they do.
Right.
And healthcare has completely lagged behind in that. And so the opportunity to really put the patient first and to think about it from a completely different perspective was very appealing to me. And at the same time, I had one of my very close friends from childhood was 38 years old, and she died of cancer. She left behind 2 children and a husband and a family and friends who loved her. And I just needed to find something else in a different purpose. And so this OhioHealth opportunity came my way. And little did I know how impactful it would be in my life, and the opportunities that it would present in terms of being able to put the customer, whether the customer is a patient or the clinician or the associate, at the center of everything we do.
Boy, first of all, really sorry to hear about your friend. My wife and I ride Pelotonia, and we have since it started. And we did because we knew Stephanie Spielman. And
Yeah.
same thing happened to her at a really young age. And so I think everybody has some kind of story about that. So I get it, from that sense.
You just need that more, I think at that age you're looking for more purpose, right? You spend a lot of time away from your family when you're in roles like we have, and the notion of giving back in some way at the same time that you're earning your paycheck certainly was appealing, and, kind of that mission-driven purpose was very appealing to me.
Wow, that's fantastic. So exactly what do you do there? Like,
Yeah.
Given your role and everything, they offered you this great job. You get a great sense of purpose, and so what do you do?
Yeah, so my job has actually evolved. So when I first started, it was much more heavy into the marketing side, so the digital marketing side of the world, right? So advertising, working on campaigns, building a website, building an app, thinking about how we were going to incorporate voice, things like that. Social media was a huge component of it. And my role has really evolved to the point now where I lead all of the product side of digital for OhioHealth. So under my purview, I've got a team of product managers who deal with strategy and long-term roadmaps. I've got product owners who work on delivery and working with our technology teams to making sure that we're delivering those digital products. I've got user experience folks on my team who are making sure that they keep the customer always at the center of everything that we do. I always say that they have the hardest job because when everybody else wants to go one way, they always have to be the voice of the customer in the room, right? And so when you're in a room full of business people and people want to go one way because it's better for the business, you have to remain true to who the customer is, right? Then I also have other parts to my role. I still have marketing responsibilities in the sense of, I work on marketing analytics. I have customer experience researchers that report to me. And then I also have a web operations team. And then I still get pulled in every once in a while for things like social media crises and stuff like that. So it's a pretty expansive job, but
Yeah.
it's been an opportunity that has evolved over time, and it's been pretty incredible.
So when you talk about the centering around the customer, does that mean that you do a lot of research with that?
We do, actually, yeah. So we spend a lot of time with our customers, whether that's a patient, their caregivers. But like I mentioned, so clinicians are also our customers, right? Like we all have friction in our lives, and the systems and the experiences that we have create friction. And so our role on my team is to pull that friction out and to make those experiences easier for people.
Well, that's pretty well defined. A lot easier said than done, though, I would imagine.
It is, yeah.
When I think about any hospital experience I've ever had, I mean, there's a ton of friction.
Yeah, it's. I like to say there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah, that's true. It really is.
I think that's it, but that was the promise of 3 years ago, and that is what drives me every day because I want to make that experience better for people. So I want when you have that horrible diagnosis or you're visiting your friend in the hospital that you're not thinking about, how do I get from point A to point B? And I'm not saying that we have all these things figured out. We certainly don't. But, the opportunity to work on those types of projects is what drives me.
So you mentioned before, and we talk about it here all the time too. Like customer focused, you have to be customer focused. Brian Cornell of Target came out and said everything we do is going to be about the customer, and you mentioned that as well. So how does that start, and then where are you guys at, or where do you feel like the healthcare system is, at least the one that you're involved with, compared to where you need to be? Like, what's the delta here?
It's interesting because I think for the longest time in healthcare, the only customer that healthcare systems cared about actually was the physician, right? So they were the center of the universe as opposed to the patient. And so that shift has definitely started, right? I mean, I think that there's been this sea change that's happened, right? I mean, I don't know how it happened that healthcare got, a pass for so long, right? I mean, so everybody else in the world, in 2005 and 2006 realized that their customers, had control of their brands, right? And healthcare, sat back, relaxed, and enjoyed the show. And so, 20 years later, 15 years later, we're looking down the barrel of, oh my God, we were silly. HIPAA, people hid behind HIPAA laws and things like that for so long. And so that's the opportunity, right? And so I think that there is a change. We talk about it all the time at OhioHealth about putting the patient at the center. From my team's perspective, that has to do with everything. It has to do with design thinking and gaining empathy and walking in the shoes of your customer so that you really understand. And the power for us is actually when the patient and the clinician and their experiences merge. So I'll give you an example. Throughput and how people move through a system is very important in hospitals. And it's universally challenging. So from admission all the way through kind of exiting somebody from the hospital. And if you've been in the hospital, you've probably experienced that it's, the doctor comes in and then you wait 12 hours and you're like, why am I still here? Or we're waiting on something. It just never seems to make sense, right?
Yeah.
So we did a huge project recently where in the past we just would have asked the clinicians, what they thought of the situation. And they have lots of opinions, and it was great. And we talked to social workers, and we talked to nurses, and we talked to physicians. And so it was kind of the entire care team. And they all had, various opinions. And then the difference as my team has come online in the last year is that we were like, no, we're not just talking to the clinicians. We're got to add the customer into the mix here. And so we went and talked to the customers and had that conversation. And so we mapped the entire journey from both the clinician standpoint and the user standpoint. And what was interesting is that if we had just solved from the clinician, we would have solved for the wrong problem. But when we added the patient into the mix, the biggest opportunity was the place where the clinicians and the patients had the most trouble together, right? So it became this kind of mega problem to solve. And we are continuing to develop solutions against that problem. And so that was the difference, and that bringing that customer-centered viewpoint. And I'm not saying that the clinicians aren't important; they absolutely are, right? They're incredibly important in this situation. But when you take both together, that's where the real power lies.
I think that's, I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of bizarre, in that a healthcare system or whatever, a hospital, a clinic, is the customer. The customer is the whole thing, you would think.
Yeah, I think, but that's a change.
The doctor's there for them. The doctor is almost like in a retail correlation. It's like somebody that works in a store, basically. And if it's all about the people that work in the store and not about the customer who comes in the door, then you're missing 3/4 of the equation.
Right. If you think about the entire clinical team, though, yes, they are the customer to my team, right? So I'm viewing the customer in kind of the broader sense, because how they interact with the digital systems and how the experience that they have absolutely impacts the patient experience. Because if they don't have access to the same viewpoint as somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Then if they're having communication or transparency issues from their experience, that equates to the experience that the patient is having, because they're not having, every clinician wants that experience to be as good as it possibly can be in a hard time. They're not trying to make it more difficult, but sometimes the way that that systems are built, introduces the friction into the situation. And so if we look at it from both perspectives, then we can solve for the overall as opposed to just trying to solve for one of them.
It's I noticed a big difference. I had an appointment at a new Mount Carmel West facility in Hilliard.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I mean, it's brand new. And I walked in there and everything had changed. So the way you were greeted was changed. Somebody said, "Sir, can you come over here? I can help you." I mean, almost like, again, retail or like a really good restaurant or whatever it might be, but it was more like that. And then they said, "Listen, we're not going to make you wait more than 5 minutes." They told me that there. We're guaranteeing you that. And then we're going to take you back, and we guarantee that the doctor will be here within like 6 or 7 minutes. He's got one more person to see. Like, this, what I guess, in our old worlds or in your old world and in our current world, we would just consider sort of normal operating procedure, like how a retail store functions. I mean, you tell somebody, especially now online, we go, "You're going to be on the phone for this service for 30 seconds or sometimes a lot longer." But
Yeah, I mean, I think that's at the end of the day, just because you're in healthcare, the expectation of the customer, it shouldn't change, right? I mean, I'm a customer of healthcare. I just had an appointment the other day and I waited for 45 minutes. And I was like, what am I waiting here for, right? I mean, this could be,
that's what you think.
I mean, why is my time not as valuable as somebody else's time, right? And so just because I work in healthcare doesn't mean that I don't have the same expectations as whether I'm shopping on Amazon or shopping in Crate and Barrel or wherever I am, because that's the expectation of being a customer in the world, right?
So do you think that, this sort of epiphany that your company has gone through and that is happening at Mount Carmel West and places like that, do you think that this is just the beginning of that there's going to be more of a sea change across the board?
Oh, 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, just the sharing of data and information, that alone will change things, right? Because as data frees up and information is exchanged more freely and easily, that changes the expectation. In addition to the fact that, the shift has happened where you are now responsible for most people, their paycheck, a third of it is, on average, is used by healthcare. Like, that's insane, right? And so if you're responsible for that amount of money coming out of your own paycheck, people all of a sudden start to pay a lot more attention to the experience that they're receiving and what they want from it. And so, I mean, we as a healthcare system, have to deliver on the experience, or you'll go to Mount Carmel or you'll go to Ohio State, right? I mean, what's the experience difference for OhioHealth? Because if we can't have an equal to, or I would prefer a better experience, right? And from a digital experience, I'm hoping to remove friction and make your life easier, so you'll choose us every time.
So along those same lines, I read an article in HBR about disruption. And they interviewed CEOs and people from about 40 different companies. And the conclusion of the story was that it wasn't the technology. Technology was not the disruptor at all, but it was the customer that disrupted everything. Is the same hold true in healthcare?
Oh, 100%. So it's so funny that you mentioned that, because that is a great article, and actually I wrote it down because it's digital doesn't have to be disruptive, actually is the title of that article. So your listeners, your listeners should check it out, because it was really impactful. I actually just used a quote from it in a presentation to our board that's being delivered today. But it's the same thing, absolutely, 100%. Technology is easy, right? If you really think about it. So our CTO always tells me, "Sarah, don't worry about the tech." He's like, "That's just zeros and ones. You have the hard job." He's like, "That's the experience," because that has to do with the customer.
Oh my God, that makes so much sense. I'm going to cry.
So I mean, our CTO is like, let me deal with the technology part of it, but you have to bring the customer to the table and understanding of that customer. And so the customer is what disrupts the situation, because their expectations are ever evolving. And it happens because of everything else that we're interacting with in the world, right? So just going back to that example, if I expect a certain situation from Amazon, you better believe I expect the same thing in every other aspect of my life, right? You don't stop at the front door and be like, well, okay, this could be different.
Well, it's funny that, but that's pervasive. That's a pervasive mentality now. People call it convenience, but really, and I always wondered why it took so long. But I bought some Christmas presents online like in 1997, and I thought, I'm never going back to a mall again at Christmas because, of everything, right? It's cold outside. You got to stand in line. The employees are part-time, the whole 9 yards. And, the same would be true. Then I started to think about everything like that. Like, why don't these guys bring me my food? Mm-hmm. And so now that's happening in the restaurant industry where delivery is a major factor. But then you're right. I mean, you start to think about it in every aspect of your life. Like, why is my car not doing this? Or why didn't somebody come out and work on my car at my house? Or, when I go to healthcare, what am I doing sitting here for 45 minutes?
Right. I could have done that through a telehealth visit, right?
Yeah.
I could have had that. It was just my yearly wellness check. I mean, there was nothing wrong other than the fact that I needed a blood draw, which I could have taken 10 minutes, and I could have done it at a variety of places. And so that's the kind of experience as we look forward that you'll start to see more of, right? I mean, so it'll be much more digitally enabled because at the end of the day, if you want to see your physician live and in the flesh, absolutely. Like, we would never restrict that. But we also want to give choice into that ecosystem so that you can choose based on the life that you want to live, what is best and easiest for you.
Well, it seems like maybe retail started it, like online shopping started it. But I think that now, like, I think about that for everything. Like, just bring it to me. I'm in charge. Don't do that. And if you don't do it, I'm just going somewhere else. It's interesting. Like, more than interesting, I guess, that it's also happening in healthcare. Because now it's got me thinking, what am I doing? Like, going to that guy.
Right. Like, I'm like,
and I got to wait for 45 minutes ever again.
Yeah.
Well, and there are some, what we call clinics or the doc in the box type of scenarios. Upper Arlington has one in our neighborhood. And what I really like about it is you make an appointment within like a 10-minute span and they honor it, but you do it online.
Yep.
So you go online and go, I'll go Thursday, 10 o'clock, click it, and you go there, show up at Thursday, 10 o'clock, and they take you right back there. I mean, it's a sign of things to come, I think. Okay, a little bit of an outside question for you,
okay.
But, given your position in the healthcare world, what do you think of everybody, politicians mostly today, talking about free healthcare? What's your thought on that?
So I lived in D.C. for about 8 years. And so to me, when I hear something like free healthcare, it just sounds like Washington buzzwords in a soundbite, as opposed to the nuances that come along with everything, now having been in healthcare, right? But I can tell you from my own perspective, and again, this has nothing to do with OhioHealth. This is Sara Saldoff. I don't believe that a medical event should bankrupt a family. I don't believe that medical schools should be so prohibitively expensive that it makes more sense for people to only be specialty physicians instead of going into primary care. I don't believe that your zip code should be the predictor of your life expectancy. And I think that there's lots of work and opportunity ahead of us. And I think that we all have our own role to play in this as well. So choices that we make impact our health, whether that's from the food we eat to whether we smoke or how we take care of ourselves. We also play a role in that. So I don't know that this is, an all-government decision. I don't think that this is an all, us as humans decision. I think that it's going to be a collaborative effort together to fix the problems in healthcare.
I think you're right. And I think that, all of the aforementioned and the stress that comes with it, a third of your paycheck, but it's a stress of, what if somebody else gets sick on top of the third that I'm already kind of forking out, then you have a real issue. And one of the reasons why I wanted to ask that question is because I just came from a democratic socialist country in Norway, and they don't think about that. It's not an issue. And you go through the list of childcare and all that stuff, and it's like check, 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 check. So, and there's incidentally like a lot less stress. In Norway,
I'm all for less stress.
It could be they could just be a mellower people. I don't know what for sure, but anyway. One of the things I also heard about you is your interest or your expertise on artificial intelligence is, and it's happening across the board in whatever industry, and there's commercials about it, like AI is going to save the world. We have rappers talking about, AI is going to save the world. And tell us about that. Like, what do you think about AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI, I don't know if it's going to save the world, but it'll certainly make it more interesting. I think, I don't have this fear that, the bots are coming after my job or anything like that. But I think at the end of the day, AI is really about finding patterns in the world, right? And so you probably have it surrounding you all the time and you might not even realize it. So for me, a great example is I pick up my daughter on Thursdays from school. But every time I get into my car, I use Waze because not because I don't know how to get to my house, but because it tells me which way to go because the traffic is better, right?
Yeah.
But on Thursdays when I go to pick up my kiddo, Waze asks if I want to go to her school. So it has learned the pattern that on Thursdays I don't go home, I go to school. And so it's that type of thing where that the machine learning is getting smarter and it's following the pattern, right? So that's what it's looking for. So that's happening in healthcare as well. And so I think that that's the opportunity that I'm super excited about is the notion of how can we predict who is going to get sick so that we can help them in advance of them getting sick. So it's that type of predictive learning that excites me. And as we start thinking about the patterns of things, and then also things like voice and other types of technology that are going to be really interesting. So if you have a smart room, we call certain things time vampires. So it's those things that take the clinical staff away from providing care. So it could be, you hit the button because you need ice chips, or you hit the button because you have a question around what are visiting hours. Those are all things that could be easily handled in a different way as opposed to the nurse having to come in and run in and talk to you about it. And so the question becomes, could you ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, I'd like ice, please. And so that note goes to the nurse's station, and there's a digital board that has a collection of all of the things that people need, and so they can triage that appropriately, right? So if somebody's in pain or needs something, they would go to the top of the list. Then I also know that rooms 1, 5, and 7 need the ice chips, so I only have to go and get the ice chips one time, right? And so think about like restaurants and how they, service tables and things like that, right? So it just becomes an easier way of dealing with the situation and answering questions that are repeatable, right? So Alexa can answer the question of when office hours, of when visiting hours are, because that's a typical question that we get asked a lot. And so those could be easily answerable through AI as opposed to having to rely on our clinical staff to do that kind of stuff.
I think the voice thing is a big thing for me. Now, I use that with Google now all the time, and it's just such a relief not to have to type in, why does so-and-so, what happened to Andrew Johnson, or something like that. It takes forever. So do you think there's a downside? Is there a dark side to AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a dark side to technology, but I think I tend to view the world in a positive light, and so
I noticed.
Yeah, so I tend to. I don't mean to downplay it, right? I mean, look, cybersecurity is real. Making sure that we are safe and secure. AI can also. I mean, I actually went to the Wired conference last year. They had Wired 25, and they were talking. I can't remember which. It might have been the CEO of Google at the time was saying that AI makes him a bit nervous because because of the data, if you infect the data at the root cause, you can perpetuate lots of things that happen, right? And so in chatting and listening to him talk about the future of AI, I mean, he's bullish on it because he sees the power in it, but there's also the dark side, as you like to call it, because if you have one infection of the data that replicates itself, and it can get out of control quickly. So those are the types of things that we're going to have to watch out for in the future.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add before we go to our infamous lightning round?
I don't think so. All right, hit me.
Okay, so I'm just shoot out a word, and I need you to respond quickly. First thing that comes to your mind. Instagram.
Ads. I feel like every other thing on Instagram right now is an ad. I want to see more of my friends' things and less ads.
Boy, is that true. Do you remember, getting off, this is not so light.
Okay.
But I remember thinking, technology is going to show, every time I went online, I didn't see ads, and now I can't do anything without seeing an ad. I watch a stupid baseball replay, and they would make me watch 2 ads before I can watch, like, a home run. It's unfair. Anyway, good one. Kramer.
Nancy. Yeah, so obviously...
Not the guy on Seinfeld.
No, not for me. I think of Nancy Kramer. She started Resource, now IBM iX. Great visionary, and, I appreciate everything that she offered into my career.
Yeah, I like her myself. I think she's terrific. Favorite comfort food?
Bready, carbs, and ice cream.
Just bready,
like pasta and bread and anything that, is just like turns into pure sugar in your bloodstream. I love it.
Okay. And finish the sentence. You are addicted to?
Bready, carbs, and ice cream. No, I would actually say currently I'm addicted to tile websites. We're going through a home renovation, so I spend a lot of time looking at tile, which is part of the reason that I feel like my ads are like on all the time.
Yeah.
For Instagram, all I see are tile ads. So
I had somebody tell me once they were talking in their house about renovating, painting a certain room. And all of a sudden ads started to show up, and they didn't go online, they didn't do anything, and all they could think of was that the TV was listening. Talk about dark side.
Right.
Anyway, but okay, well, thank you, Sarah. I mean, you've been terrific, really gracious, and much appreciated, and a lot of terrific insights.
Thank you
for
having me.
It was great to
Appreciate
have
it.
you. Okay, people, be sure and listen next week for some more human interaction on hot topics like AI. And I don't mean just the store of the future. It could be something like democratic socialism. I don't know. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. WDcast is at WDP.com, WDPartners.com. Go to the menu hamburger and hit what we think. Then go to the very bottom of that page, bottom center, and hit the podcast icon and pick one. And we've got a bunch of great ones in there now, Google, Huntington, and we even have one with Alexa, actually. So much appreciated. We'll talk to you all next week.